Trevor, what you're saying is that the oral version of Ligandrol is going to be suppressive on natural testosterone levels for two reasons. One, because it's passing through the liver, which is interfering with the body's natural homeostasis of hormones that are
the extensive metabolization of sex hormones by the liver. Yeah.
And because it's attaching the androgen receptor in the muscle, which is giving some sort of feedback also to the body to lower androgens. Okay.
But the other theory is the fact that it might not just be the androgenic overload on a muscle, but the androgenic overload on other tissues, soft tissues.
Okay.
So that could be the response to your brain.
Yeah, we actually don't know which tissue and how it's sending that signal, but we know there's some signal being sent from somewhere.
THC, if you look at that too again, liver breaks it down, lungs break it down, brain, there's every organ, and then even those proteins in your blood go after it and will break down into a metabolite.
So there's two angles that the oral Ligandrol is going to be suppressive and interfere with natural hormone homeostasis. Not saying that's a bad thing. I don't care about that. I'm on TRT. It doesn't matter to me that it suppresses my hormones at all. But for people that do care, we still research that. And if I ever do want to come off steroids, I want to end with something, or SARMs or steroids, I want to end with something less suppressive and step way down. So the Magnalone you're saying is suppressive for mainly one reason, which is the anabolic overload on either some soft tissue or the muscle cells, but not because it's interfering with the liver, because the metabolites interfering with homeostasis.
Not the metabolites, but the active paths in the liver is what's causing that. So the response, that's why the HDL increases, those proteins in here, due to that, the sex hormones.
But this is still going to have all of the potential negative side effects of the oral, just to a much lesser degree, because it's not passing through the liver on the first pass. First it's going through the body and attaching mostly, hopefully, to the muscle cell receptors, because it has such a high binding affinity. It's going to attach to the muscle cells and then go through the liver. Some's going to go through the liver.
Well, it has to clear when you're going to go piss. So it'll do the hepatic clearance, and then it'll go through renal, pee it out. So hopefully on that pass, that's not causing any effect whatsoever, versus because we're getting it in the bloodstream right away, and then it can break it down after that, before the liver as well.
How about other traditional gear side effects? So people think steroids cause roid rage. I will just say that no matter what dosage I've ever taken of Ligandrol, I don't think I ever had any mental effects, positive or negative, really. I've taken other SARMs that had effects mentally, other steroids that had effect mentally. I didn't notice anything from this. At most, I think when I go at really high dosage, I feel a sense of fatigue, which is the same thing I feel when I take anything extremely anabolic. It puts my body into want to grow like a baby and sleep and recover type phase, which is good for building muscle, but not good for productivity. So we definitely want to adjust the dosage according to how much we want to prioritize muscle growth over overall energy.
There could be so many reasons for that too. Just so you know, I mean, there's so much little research, and then the research that it does show, there is a direct proliferation, differentiation of cells because of SARMs. There is outside factors that are affecting it. So when you say tired, this could be just like Dan Duchesne's theory too of post-mediated androgen effects, right? Which is causing the growth, like a lowering myostatin or some other pathway. So keep that in mind. That could be the reason you get tired. Maybe it's an IGF growth hormone that's simplified, but because of something like that.
Isn't that less likely to be the case because SARMs are more selective towards specific muscle tissue, and therefore the androgen receptor
but anything that
binding to other places of the body?
Anything that puts, and I'm going to say stress on the body, even though this isn't directly stress, but you put your body and gave it the inflammation, you mechanical overload and damage in the gym, right? Then you take something that from that inflammation response, these now go there, and then it's telling your body, send us everything we have, right? So when it's doing that, the other nutrients, so everything's going there, right? And then the rest of the nutrients that your body is normally getting has to start sending down there. So your body wants to get tired, and to speed this up, what has to happen, right? Sleep, GABA, there's so many other factors.
It's funny to think of that some of the SARM and steroid side effects are actually a result of increasing performance. So you end up training harder, heavier and longer in the gym, which ends up breaking the body down more, which is good so long as we're recovering from it, but bad if we're not recovering, and that can lead to a lot of inflammation and a lot of other stress on the body.
Well, originally, most doctors were saying that they were weakening tendons, and that was the only reason, but mostly was because of the strength increase and then the overload of the size of the muscle. You have pulling on the tendon, but then it's the overload, mechanical overload that you're doing, which was causing most of those.
All right, so next steroid side effect, whether we experience or not, hair loss. I have not experienced any hair loss. Coach Trevor, I don't think you can report one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, I won't say.
Do you think it could have any potential for hair loss?
Nothing more than an ex-wife could. So, but again,
well, that's
no.
A lot. That's
so
a lot of hair loss.
6 months. I have to. Yeah, 100%. Goes right back again to this. This is why it's so important, oral versus the inject, is because the less crash that you're gonna get from SHBG, what binds to the follicle, right? DHT. What's more potently that, and the metabolite is being broken down into due to this increase is even worse on it. And that's all from the crash. That's all from taking something oral that is causing this effect. So potentially, especially dose dependency and how much you're taking, it would be, no, you wouldn't have any until certain dosages.
I'm trying to think of other steroid side effects, but I experience so few side effects from steroids anyways that it's hard to relate it. Oh, gyno.
Muscle growth.
Gyno. Certainly it would be very unlikely to experience gyno from either version, right? I mean, it's not directly going to cause gyno, but
I do have to say,
indirectly by skewing hormones, causing more testosterone to not bind to the receptor. Is that possible that your receptors could get saturated by a very high dosage of Magnalone, and therefore testosterone doesn't have a place to bind, and testosterone has a lower binding affinity, so testosterone then just converts to DHT and estrogen, and of course eventually your body would lower the testosterone, but if it didn't, then your estrogen and DHT could be elevated? Is that possible?
Tell me where the androgen receptors are in your body. It's not just skeletal tissue.
Everywhere, yeah. Or not
so
everywhere, but
testosterone,
a lot of different tissues.
It's a sex hormone, so it's going to go to everywhere else. If it's outbound on skeletal tissue, it'll go everywhere else. And again, that's not bad, that's good. If you have low dose of testosterone, keep things functioning, because IGF, it doesn't have to be on the androgen receptor on skeletal tissue to have an effect. Okay. Right?
Okay. Next, because I can't think of any other steroid side effects. I know there's a lot of potential steroid side effects. Oh, acne. Okay, I don't usually get acne from steroids. Actually, I don't get acne from steroids hardly ever. Every once in a while, and it's hard to pinpoint, but it's just like one pimple. Do you anticipate, or have you seen in our other test subjects, because we do have a lot of other test subjects that have reported to us on both of these, have you seen them have much acne from these?
Well, I've seen gyno in an oral version, and I actually personally seen that happen with my friend's client. Yeah, gyno from SARMs, and they were the same SARMs too that everyone else was taking. But yeah, he did get it. He was very sensitive because he took very little milligrams and he grew like a weed. And I know people who take 200 milligrams of testosterone every 10 days and it flares up almost 5 days after.
So is that just unique because some individuals are extremely sensitive? Because I have not met anybody that have had that problem from the
So there's always an underlying factor for every individual when it comes to how your body's going to react, right? When it comes hormones, the breakdown of them, your sensitivity. So there is truth. There is androgen sensitivity, and they can measure it. There is estrogen sensitivity. There's everything that this is going to affect orally. Somebody can have a sensitivity, whether it's the receptor or whatever hormone it's going to be. So getting an exacerbated effect from it.
So it's an important point to make that there are some people that have predispositions to have certain side effects that are very sensitive to it, and also some people that are hypersensitive to the dosage of these compounds, which is why whenever we're experimenting with a new compound, we start with an extremely low dosage and we work our way up to, and definitely not recommending this, but a very high dosage, and that way we figure out sort of the range and threshold, the law of diminishing returns, what the potential side effects are, and then we find where the optimal dosage is in between.
Okay? Just all the final note, all the side effects of the oral SARM, 9 times out of 10 should be lower no matter what on the same dose of this. Actually 99.999% of the time.
Okay.
Milligram per milligram.
Future experiments. So you wanted to, we have a lot of lab equipment at Tony Huge Labs. That's where we do a lot of our testing. But we do not have the ability to test for certain metabolites because we would have to get a separate test for every type of metabolite we're testing for, which is going to be a lot of work. And so we have to figure out what we want to, what metabolites we want to test for.
So they've already found the metabolites. They've posted these also. So I believe the S23, and all you have to do is go back to these when they were conducted. I believe it was 4 metabolites
is
or 5.
Is that something you want to do, though? That's a possible future experiment.
Well, so this will show us bioavailability difference only, right? And it can show us clearance, half-life, things like that.
How's that going to show? How's that going to prove or show or teach us how much more bioavailable the Magnalone is than the oral? Actually, I should say the Magnalone isn't that going to be 100% bioavailable? It's going straight into the muscle and therefore into the bloodstream?
It will be 100%.
Okay, so then the real test is what percentage of the oral is bioavailable. And then we got to test with food, empty stomach, different dosages.
So it's the actual drug that they find in your urine versus the metabolites that they find, and then there's feces too. There's blood. You could test this in blood, but you test those and you see how much of the metabolites are being produced, and then compare that also with the active drug being found in there. And by doing this, you have to remember how many of these do we know the true bioavailability of. SR9009, 2%, garbage. You have, what is this one, 30? Or was it S23?
I read RAD 140 was high,
Rad.
like 65, 70%.
And
we don't know what the bioavailability of a lot of other SARMs are.
Yeah, so they really, I mean, if you find it, let me know.
Okay.
I found some literature on an S23. But again, we have 2%, we have 30%, and as high as 60 so far. And if you look at this chain, just look, I mean, this, you have, imagine every steroid chain just being put together. That's what, when you look at this, it's not going to have the same bioavailability. It's going to be very low. So it'll never be 100%, but it's definitely lower than that. So you're going to get a big difference with bioavailability. However, we're talking about the potency.
Potency. All right. So what is the difference between the bioavailability and the potency, and what experiment can we do to actually show the difference in potency? And the purpose of this is to establish the effective dosage, because we can experiment with oral by itself and sort of figure out what works, and then we can experiment with Magnalone intramuscular injection or injection into subcutaneous injection, and figure out sort of what the effects are. But if we want to find out scientifically, comparing apples to apples, milligram to milligram, that's what you're referring to as the potency. And how would we test that?
So this is how they measure all pharmaceuticals. They call it the Cmax. And what this is, it's a graph, right? It'll show you on a graph how they check for, let's say the measurement is nanograms per deciliter in your blood that they're going to check for. And they're constantly checking this while you take it. So you see at what time it peaks and how high it peaks and as it drops off. You get to watch that. That's why we have the information like testosterone enanthate, vericipionate. You'll see them, and then also where you inject it is a huge factor too. Glute 7 days, you have shoulder 10 to 12, right? And so you go back, it's always measured in Cmax. And so when we go back to potency, this is the main, well, this is one of them. You're going to have a drastic increase on your Cmax, right, on the graph. It's massive. And then you look at how it drops off. Well, it's still dropping off. Maybe it's dropping off a little faster than the oral, but it's you're not having a significant difference. So you're actually getting more of the drug in your system longer at a higher level too.
You just said that if you inject into the glute, it's going to hit faster for a shorter period of time than if you inject in the shoulder, it's going to distribute slower. So if I actually wanted to use the Magnalone and because there's Magnalone and Magnalone extended release, but if I wanted to just use a regular Magnalone and then put it in my shoulder, that's going to cause some extended release in and of itself just by the location I've administered it.
Yeah, so it'd be something like this, right? The shoulder, and it all comes to the size of the muscle and the blood flow to that area. That's why subcutaneous injections of testosterone, where I'm going to use an Enthate because I still remember it. You have 7 days, let's say, here on the glute, so it spikes. And then that's when you see the highest level, 5 days, and then 7 days it starts going down.
Wait, go back again. 7 days on which compound?
Testosterone and Enthate.
Okay, testosterone and Enthate.
And then you give in the shoulder right here.
That's a not half-life. What is it then?
7 days you get the highest spike.
Peak. Oh, the peak hits in 7 days.
5 to 7. And because everyone's metabolism is different. These are in fats. You have 10 days for a shoulder, right? 10 to 12.
7 days glute, 10 to 12 shoulder.
Yeah. So you have to look at those curves too. You get very slow and then it builds up and it's not very high and then back down. Versus the build up spike, and sometimes they spike instant and then drop completely off.
Okay.
Right? So you have both forms, but this is how it's measured. That's one form of potency.
And guys, this depends a lot on which oil it's dissolved on and blood flow. There's so many factors that determine. I've seen people that metabolize steroids extremely fast, other people that metabolize them very slowly. So that's just a rule of thumb to say that I guess the peak is more likely to happen 30% sooner in a glute injection because of the increased blood flow.
And you have to remember, because steroids they're not water soluble materials and they're put in oil as well, you're going to have, what would you say, on the time, you're unable, they use esters, right? Esterification. They use esters to control the half-life of the drug, which when you're doing this reaction, you take up some milligrams of the molecule. That's not the only way to do something to a drug to extend its life. I mean, there's so many reasons, or so many variations, but one, for an example, was the cross-link. You could do a cross-link, or maybe I should use a different example.
there's a million different ways. Not a million. There's many different ways we can extend the life of the drug.
Sulfate.
I'm trying to simplify it just for myself, like injection location. So.
Oh yeah. So location.
I'm just going to compare it to something totally different. Off topic for a second. So Winstrol is something that has a very short half-life in an injection. So I'm going to use pre-competition to dry ourselves out for muscle definition. Could I hit that in my shoulder so that I can inject it a little bit less frequently than if I were injecting it in my glute? Then it's gonna be out of my system. It's gonna peak too quickly because the half-life's so fast.
Yes and no. So with Winstrol or any bases, what happens is instantly you're gonna have you're gonna have the solvents and co-solvents dissipate. Then that precipitates, and the hormone precipitates out of solution basically. There is oil left, which can take whatever amount of time. But what happens, especially water-based, even the oil, depending on the solution, is it goes back to its original form. And then you take Winstrol, it's like crystals, like shards of glass, and then they actually compile. That's why it hurts so bad. It causes so much inflammation. Where they get growth from it is actually the inflammation and damage to the tissue. But it's those crystals that sit there, and actually you can do this with testosterone base and take no testosterone, check your levels, inject it, and watch how many days, because it will be about 4 to 5 days or so. It'll still be in your system.
Of suspension?
Yes.
But how long until it peaks?
It'll peak very fast.
Okay, I thought so, because I feel that if I hit it pre-workout.
But you will still have more than that normal levels.
So it's like a sharp peak and just a slow, and then like sharp peak, and then it kind of gradual.
Yeah, and especially the higher milligram you give, the longer it'll stay.
Okay.
But you will have higher levels.
I'm glad I brought that up because it actually does relate to Magnalone. So first of all, is Magnalone like shards of glass like the Winstrol? I mean, Winstrol, testosterone suspension, these steroids that have no ester, oftentimes are in a suspension, which means they're the crystals that when you inject it, like you said, they leave the crystals in the muscle. Is that happening with the Magnalone, or is the Magnalone's, I guess you call it smooth? Does it distribute through the body more easily.
So this is where the main difference is on this, right? With those with hormones in general, and then being, let's say it is like Winstrol, right? And we're gonna take the 50 milligram Winstrol, compare that to 50 milligram of LGD. Well, with the the reason we have an IR or immediate release is the fact that we can make these out. They're water soluble. These you can use completely.
And Winstrol is not water soluble.
No, that's why it hurts so bad.
And testosterone is not water soluble.
No, they're all no steroid hormone is they're all fatty. Just think of fats. Always oil, oil, oil. Anything related to oil. So because of this too, now these things, as soon as it hits your blood, they can disperse.
How is it possible that Winstrol and testosterone have such a short half-life when they have no ester? Any steroid with no ester has such a short half-life, but then the Ligandrol has such a long half-life. I mean, these other SARMs also, some of them
Binding
have very
affinity.
short half-life. The Ligandrol like stays in the body and circulates for days.
Yeah, so it's the drug life, and again, these are very comparable to steroids, and they're also uncomparable to steroids. It's very strange until we figure these out. But again, it's a pro-drug, or steroids are pro-drugs. Think of them that way. These are active, right? And then not just that, the fact that the way these are working, that completely separates the two. So when you talk about half-life on an androgen receptor, we can't even really compare it if you think about it to steroids. And not just that, but steroids affect everything.
So I'm asking Trevor to compare it, and he's like, it's not comparable.
Well,
so let's try to compare it one more way here. Why is 50 milligrams of Magnalone so much more powerful than most any other injectable steroid at 50 milligrams? I mean, it's not more powerful than methyltren or your other DHT alternative, DHT, or some other ones like that. But for the most part, it's more powerful milligram per milligram than 90% of steroids. How is that possible?
Well, we'll say in two aspects, because I know people are going to bring up the other. One is on the androgenic receptor, milligram for milligram, 100%. These will always be more effective because they're only working on skeletal androgen receptors, right? These are working everywhere. There's androgen receptors found everywhere. It's being cleaved off because these are from sex hormones, testosterone. When they're from this, your body thinks of it as an increase or an overload in a hormone, and it just keeps going, that cascade effect, and gets wasted. It starts being converted into other things that aren't effective, right? Some of them maybe are more effective, like the DHB. So you have that, right? That's your first reason. And milligram for milligram, that's why. But the second reason, we don't know.
All right. So let's just relate it to methyltren. How is it possible that 1 milligram of methyltren could be more powerful than 100 milligrams of testosterone? How's that even possible? 1/100th of the dosage, because that might help us understand why 50 milligrams of Magnalone is equivalent to probably 250 milligrams of testosterone, like 5 times more powerful. At least. We don't even know, but it's one of the most powerful things I've ever used, and yet only at 50 milligrams. How's that possible?
We have methyltrianolone, and then we have trenbolone.
So methyltrianolone. That's the one that, like, 1 milligram.
And you're comparing it to a trenbolone?
Yeah, there's a good example. So methyltrenbolone versus...
Trianolone.
Methyltrianolone versus trenbolone.
Yeah.
Like, such a small dosage is so potent. And here we have, is it the same situation? Is it the same reason why this is so much more powerful than steroids, milligram per milligram?
No, because also that's...
I just thought of one reason why, actually. Though.
Yeah, we're measuring side effects, too.
My ADD's coming out here. Like, testosterone is so weak. One of the reasons why is because sex hormone binding globulin eats it up. And only what matters is the free testosterone. And something like 95% of our circulating testosterone is bound to sex hormone binding globulin, which renders it ineffective, which is why trestolone is so much more powerful, because it doesn't bind to SHBG. So there's one reason. Just set that aside. because that explains why.
But also testosterone would be the
Testosterone's
most
so
effective steroid. If you had to take one steroid and you took anything else, the overall effect, testosterone would be the best. But that's why you take it with an anabolic too.
So would you, I obviously already do take TRT of testosterone. It varies between 200 and 400 milligrams per week. Sometimes I take no testosterone though, at all. And I usually combine that with whatever else I'm running, so like the Magnalone. So you're saying there's a huge benefit to running the TRT along with the Magnalone if I'm taking enough Magnalone that it's suppressing my natural testosterone production, because the presence of testosterone is so helpful to the anabolic process for so many more reasons outside the actual androgen receptor.
So if you want maximum performance, maximum muscle, taking testosterone would be your best bet. You never want you never want low testosterone when we're talking performance and building muscle, unless we're doing contests. So bodybuilders are a little bit different. But if you want to keep the side effect free or very little side effects of a injectable version like Magnalone, then you would just take HCG. So that would increase testosterone. And then again, because this crashes SHBG or can lower it, the estrogen, you have a lower estrogen, right? That's another complaint, is that we don't have, our estrogen's too low, we don't grow. Well, this right here, again, you come back, actually, you come back to the side effects, we're not getting the SHBG and then the estrogen crash, so we're going to have healthy estrogen. Now take HCG.
So I know what you guys are thinking right now. You guys are thinking, why the hell would anybody inject a SARM when the whole point of SARMs is to be able to take a pill instead of having to do injections? I know it sounds ridiculous. Now I'm thinking like in a third person, like how it sounds, the audience are thinking, why the hell wouldn't you just take steroids rather than injecting SARMs? It's a good point, really. I mean, steroids themselves don't have a lot of side effects in my body, but I personally prefer to minimize those side effects. I'm going to tell you why I do, and then you can answer. And also, I've experimented with many different types of steroids. That's what I do. I experiment with all these compounds. I'm not bigger because I don't run long cycles these things. I'm a test subject. I'm not a professional bodybuilder. But when I did 50 milligrams of Magnalone, I decided I probably never need steroids again. So it just plain is more effective. That's been my experience. So that's why I continue to use it.